They called her a peasant in a lord's house. They mocked her silence as stupidity and her modesty as poverty. When Isabella the Duke's mistress spilled red wine over Adele's simple white gown, the entire hall erupted in laughter. Adele's husband Adrien didn't defend her. He laughed the loudest, apologizing to his guests for his wife's lack of taste. But silence is not weakness, and that cheap dress held a secret woven into its very seams. They thought they were breaking a nobody. They didn't realize they were insulting the only daughter of the realm's most feared conqueror king. The laughter was about to die and heads were about to roll. The chandeliers of the Kensington Manor were blinding, casting a kaleidoscope of light over the polished marble floors. It was the eve of the winter solstice gala, and Adrien, the Earl of Kensington, was hosting a private dinner for the city's elite. Adele sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She felt like a ghost in her own home. She wore a dress of simple, unadorned white linen. It was clean-pressed and fitted her slender frame perfectly. But compared to the heavy velvet silks and jewels dripping from the other women in the room, she looked stark. To her right sat Adrien, her husband of 3 years. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way, dark hair slicked back, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that always seemed to be looking for the next best thing. Currently, his eyes were fixed on the woman sitting directly across from him, Isabella. Isabella was everything Adele was not. She was loud, vibrant, and cruel. She wore a gown of crimson silk that was cut scandalously low and a ruby necklace that Adrien had claimed was lost in transit when Adele had asked about the family finances 2 months ago. "Oh, Adrien," Isabella purred, twirling the stem of her wine glass. "This vintage is exquisite. Far too complex for some palates, I imagine." Her eyes flicked dismissively toward Adele. Adrien chuckled, reaching out to touch Isabella's hand right there on the table. "You have always had refined taste, Isabella. That is why we get along so well." The disrespect was brazen. The other guests, Lord Bennet and Lady Clare, exchanged awkward glances but said nothing. Adrien's wealth had grown significantly in the last year, and in high society, money bought silence. "Adele," Isabella said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "You haven't touched your wine. Is it too tart for you? Or perhaps you simply don't know how to appreciate a 50-year-old Bordeaux?" Adele looked up, her expression calm. Her eyes, a striking shade of violet that usually unnerved people, were steady. "I prefer water, thank you. I find that wine often clouds one's judgment." Isabella's smile tightened. "Judgment? Oh, darling, if you had any judgment, you wouldn't be wearing that." She gestured vaguely at Adele's white dress with her fork. "Did you lose your maid? Or did you perhaps fashion that out of the dining room curtains?" The table erupted in laughter. Adrien slammed his hand on the table, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Oh, Isabella, you are terrible. But you must forgive Adele. She comes from humbler origins. She doesn't understand the fashion of the court." "I see," Isabella sneered. "A peasant's taste for a peasant girl. Tell me, Adele, how much did that cost? 5 coppers? Or did you trade a chicken for it?" "It was a gift," Adele said softly. Her fingers tightened slightly on the napkin, the only sign of her distress. "From my father." "Your father?" Adrien scoffed, taking a long drink. "The farmer. Please, Adele, don't embarrass me further by bringing up that old man. It's bad enough I married you out of pity when he died. Don't make me regret my charity." The cruelty hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "It is not a rag," Adele said, her voice rising just an octave. "The fabric is cheap," Isabella interrupted loudly. "It's cheap, plain and boring, just like you." Isabella stood up, feigning a stumble. With a dramatic gasp, her hand jerked forward, and the contents of her full glass of red wine splashed across the table directly onto Adele's chest. The crimson liquid soaked instantly into the white linen, spreading like a fresh wound over her heart. "Oh no," Isabella gasped, covering her mouth with a hand that wasn't hiding her smirk. "Look what I've done." "Oh, but honestly, it's an improvement." At least now the dress has some color." The room went silent for a heartbeat, and then Adrien burst out laughing again. "You're right. It does look better. Go upstairs and change, Adele. And try to find something that doesn't make you look like a laundry maid. We have important guests." Adele stood up slowly. The cold wine seeped through to her skin. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at Adrien, a strange, unreadable sorrow in her eyes. "You will regret this, Adrien," she whispered. "Regret what?" he sneered, laughing at a bad joke. "Go away, Adele. You're ruining the mood." Adele turned and walked out of the dining hall, her head held high despite the stain. As the heavy oak doors closed behind her, she heard Isabella ask, "How do you stand her, Adrien?" "She's a statue." "Don't worry, my love," Adrien's voice carried through the wood. "I'm working on the annulment papers. Once the king arrives for the grand ball next week and sees my contributions to the treasury, I'll be promoted to duke. Then I can marry a woman befitting my station." Adele stopped in the hallway. Her hand went to the necklace hidden beneath her dress, a simple silver locket. "The king," she whispered to the empty corridor. She opened the locket. Inside was not a picture of a lover, but a tiny intricate crest embossed in gold, a lion devouring a serpent. The royal seal of King Theodore the Conqueror. "Yes," she murmured, wiping a single tear that had escaped. "I suppose father is coming to town." The following morning, the atmosphere in the Kensington Manor was frantic. Servants rushed back and forth polishing silver that was already gleaming and beating rugs that held no dust. Adele sat in the small sunroom at the back of the house, mending the white dress. The wine stain was stubborn, but she was patient. She had been scrubbing it with a mixture of vinegar and lemon since dawn. To anyone else, it was just an old dress. To Adele, the fabric woven from the rare moonflax that grew only in the royal gardens of the northern citadel was the only thing she had left of her mother. "Madam," a timid voice spoke from the doorway. It was Sarah, the youngest maid in the household and the only one who treated Adele with genuine kindness. She held a silver tray with shaking hands. On it lay an envelope of thick cream-colored parchment sealed with heavy gold wax. "This just arrived via royal courier." Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "For the master." Adele didn't look up from her sewing. "Leave it on the desk, Sarah. He's still asleep." I can't, madam. The courier said it must be opened immediately." At that moment, the heavy footsteps of Adrien echoed down the hall. He walked into the sunroom wearing a silk robe, looking hungover and irritable. "What is all this noise?" he snapped. He spotted the letter on the tray and his eyes went wide. He snatched it up, breaking the seal with a trembling finger. As he read, a slow, greedy smile spread across his face. "I knew it," he breathed. "I knew it." "What is it?" Adele asked quietly. Adrien looked at her as if he had forgotten she existed. "It's an invitation, a personal summons from King Theodore himself. The royal entourage has arrived in the capital early. The grand ball is tonight." He paced the room, his energy manic. "He summoned the heads of the noble houses. That's me. And look here, it says he is looking to appoint a new royal treasurer. This is it, Adele. This is my ascension." He turned to her, his expression hardening. "This is the most important night of my life. Everything has to be perfect." "I will prepare my blue gown," Adele said, setting her sewing needle down. "It is modest but appropriate for—" "No." Adrien cut her off sharply. Adele froze. "No. You aren't coming, Adele." The silence stretched between them, thin and brittle. "It is a royal ball, Adrien," she said slowly. "Protocol demands that a lord be accompanied by his wife. To appear alone is an insult to the sanctity of the court." "Protocol be damned," Adrien shouted. "Look at you. You sit there mending rags. You have the personality of a whetstone. Do you think I can walk into the royal palace aiming to become the king's right hand with you on my arm?" He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "I need someone who exudes power, someone who commands the room, someone who looks like a duchess." "You are taking Isabella." Adele stated, her voice devoid of emotion. She has already ordered a dress from Paris. Adrien sneered. Gold lame with diamonds. She will dazzle the king. He will see a powerful man with a stunning consort, and he will give me the position. The king hates ostentatious displays of wealth, Adele warned softly. He is a warrior king. He values loyalty and humility. What would you know about kings? Adrien laughed, a cruel barking sound. You're a farm girl I picked up off the side of the road because your father begged me to take you in before he died. You know nothing of the court. I know more than you think, Adrien. Enough. He straightened up, fixing his robe. You will stay here. In fact, you will stay in the servants' quarters tonight. I want the master suite prepared for Isabella. She will be staying the night after the ball to celebrate my promotion. Adele stood up. For the first time, she looked down at him. Though she was shorter in that moment, she seemed to tower over him. You are making a mistake, Adrien. The invitation, does it specify names? Adrien glanced at the parchment. It says Lord Kensington and partner. Isabella is my partner in everything that matters. Very well, Adele said. She turned back to the window. But I must warn you. The king has a very specific memory. If you go there with a lie, he will see it. I am not afraid of an old man. Adrien scoffed. And you, make yourself useful while I'm gone. Scrub the floors. Maybe it will remind you of where you belong. He stormed out, shouting for his valet. Adele waited until his footsteps faded. She picked up the white dress. The stain was gone. The fabric, resilient and strong, had released the wine just as it had been designed to repel blood on the battlefield. Sarah the maid stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Oh, madam, it's not right. He's wicked. You should leave him. Adele smiled, a sad, cryptic smile. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I am not staying here tonight, Sarah. But he forbade you from going to the ball. He forbade his wife from going. Adele said, untying the pouch. She poured the contents into her hand. It was a heavy signet ring bearing the same lion and serpent crest, but the lion's eyes were made of rare violet amethysts, the exact shade of Adele's eyes. He did not forbid the Princess of Valois, Adele whispered. She looked at Sarah. Prepare a carriage, not the Kensington carriage. Go to the old stable master at the edge of the estate. Tell him the lioness has woken. He will know what to do. Sarah gasped, her hands covering her mouth. Madam, who are you? Adele slid the ring onto her finger. The gold seemed to hum with energy against her skin. I am the daughter he thought he lost, Adele said, her voice turning to steel. And tonight, I am going to teach my husband a lesson about the cost of cheap things. The old stable master lived in a dilapidated shack at the very edge of the Kensington estate, a place Adrien had threatened to bulldoze a dozen times to build a gazebo for Isabella. He was a man known simply as Old Marcus, a crippled hermit with a scarred face and one cloudy eye. Adrien treated him like a stray dog, allowing him to stay only because he was too cheap to hire a landscaping crew to clear the land. When Adele arrived at the shack, the wind was howling, whipping her white dress around her legs. She didn't knock. She simply pushed the rotting wood door open. Old Marcus was sitting by a dying fire, whittling a piece of wood. He didn't look up. Get out. I got nothing to steal. You have your sword, don't you, Commander? Adele asked, her voice ringing clear in the small space. Marcus froze. The knife dropped from his hand. He turned slowly, his good eye widening as it landed on Adele, not as the beaten-down wife of a minor earl, but as a woman standing with a posture that could command armies. He saw the ring on her finger, the lion and serpent. With a speed that defied his age and his limp, Marcus threw himself from the chair, crashing to his knees on the dirt floor. He bowed his head so low his forehead touched the ground. Princess Ilara, he choked out, using her true name. The king thought you were dead. 3 years. 3 years of silence. I needed to know Marcus, she said softly, stepping forward and placing a hand on his trembling shoulder. My father, the king, conquers lands with fire and steel. He believes power is the only truth. I wanted to know if love could exist without power. I wanted to know if a man could love me, Adele, the nobody, without the crown. And, Marcus asked, looking up, tears streaming down his scarred face. Did the Earl pass the test? Adele's face hardened. The violet eyes turned to ice. He failed, Marcus. In every way a man can fail. He mistook modesty for poverty. He mistook silence for stupidity. And tonight he dishonored the blood of Valois. Marcus struggled to his feet. His demeanor changed instantly. The hunch in his back vanished. He was no longer the stable hand. He was Sir Marcus of the Iron Guard, sworn protector of the royal line. What is your command, Highness? My husband has gone to the royal ball to claim a title he does not deserve with a mistress who mocks the very people she wishes to rule, Adele said. I intend to join them. The Kensington carriage is gone. Marcus said, a growl forming in his throat. I do not require the Kensington carriage, Adele said, walking toward the back of the shack, where a large mound of hay sat covered by a heavy, dusty tarp. I require mine. Marcus grinned, a terrifying expression on his scarred face. He grabbed the edge of the tarp and ripped it away. Beneath the dust and hay wasn't a plow or a cart. It was a carriage of midnight black ebony reinforced with iron. On the door, obscured by a layer of grime that Marcus immediately began to wipe away with his sleeve, was the crest of the royal house, the lion devouring the serpent. It has been waiting, Highness, Marcus said. I kept the axles greased. I kept the horses ready in the backwoods. The 4 black stallions. They haven't been ridden in years. They are wild. They know their mistress, Adele said. She turned to a dusty trunk in the corner of the room. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was not a dress, but a mantle. It was deep purple, lined with the fur of the snow fox, heavy and regal. And beside it a sword. Her sword. Thin, elegant, but forged from Valyrian steel. She didn't change out of the white dress. Instead, she cleaned the remaining wine stain with a splash of water from a bucket. Isabella called this dress cheap, Adele murmured, smoothing the moonflax fabric. She doesn't know that this fabric is woven by the blind monks of the high peaks. It is lighter than silk, but stronger than chainmail. It is the dress of a warrior queen. She draped the heavy purple mantle over her shoulders. It clashed violently with the image of the submissive housewife Adrien knew. She strapped the sword belt around her waist. Marcus, she commanded, saddle the horses, ride ahead to the palace. Inform the captain of the royal guard, and only the captain, that Code Violet is in effect. Marcus saluted, a sharp, crisp motion. And the king? Tell my father nothing, Adele said, stepping into the dark carriage. He loves surprises, and I want to see the look on his face when his dead daughter walks through the doors. The royal palace of Theodore the Conqueror was not built for comfort. It was built for intimidation. The great hall was a cavernous space of black stone and gold banners, large enough to hold 2,000 guests. Adrien and Isabella swept through the entrance chin high. Adrien wore a new velvet suit that cost more than the annual income of his tenants. Isabella was glittering in her gold lame dress. It was tight, revealing, and covered in so many diamonds she clattered when she walked. Look at them, Isabella whispered, loudly observing the other guests. Lord Peter is wearing last season's cut, and Lady Genevieve. Look at that neckline. Prude. Adrien laughed, guiding her through the crowd. He felt invincible. The invitation in his pocket felt like a burning weight of destiny. Keep your eyes open for the Chancellor, Adrien muttered. If I can get 5 minutes with Lord Blackwood, the treasury position is mine. They navigated the room, cutting in front of others, taking champagne from passing trays without thanking the servers. They were a whirlwind of arrogance. Lord Kensington, a voice boomed. Adrien turned to see a tall, severe-looking man with graying hair. It was Count Silas, one of the king's oldest advisors. Count Silas, Adrien bowed smoothly. A pleasure. May I present my partner, Lady Isabella? Isabella didn't curtsy. She simply extended a hand, palm down, expecting it to be kissed. Charmed, I'm sure. You're the one who manages the grain supplies, aren't you? Adrien tells me you're terribly boring, but I suppose someone has to count the wheat. Adrien stiffened. That was too far. But Count Silas didn't get angry. He didn't even blink. He looked at Isabella's hand, then up at her face, completely ignoring the gesture. And where is Lady Adele? Silas asked, his voice flat. I was under the impression that the invitation extended to legal spouses. The king is traditional regarding such matters. Adele is unwell. Adrien lied, quickly flashing a practiced smile of concern. A terrible fever. She begged me to come without her to represent our house. She sent her regards. Unwell, Silas repeated. He looked at Adrien with a gaze that felt like a physical weight. Strange. I heard she was quite healthy yesterday. Sudden onset, Isabella interjected, linking her arm possessively through Adrien's. She's very frail, you know. Poor constitution. Adrien really is a saint for putting up with her. She's quite simple. Silas stared at Isabella for a long moment. Simple, he echoed. Yes, simplicity can be a dangerous thing to underestimate, my lady. The simplest blade is often the sharpest. He turned his back on them without another word and walked away. Rude old bat, Isabella hissed. When you are treasurer, we'll cut his funding. Forget him, Adrien said, though a cold sweat had started to prickle on his neck. Look, the trumpets. The room went silent. The massive double doors at the far end of the hall, the doors of victory which were only open for the king, began to groan. A herald stepped forward, slamming a golden staff onto the marble floor. All rise for His Majesty King Theodore III, the conqueror, protector of the realm, and lord of the Iron Throne. The crowd bowed in unison. Adrien pulled Isabella down into a bow. King Theodore marched in. He was a giant of a man even in his 60s. He wore armor, not silk. A massive fur cloak draped over his broad shoulders, and the iron crown sat heavy on his white hair. His face was a map of scars, and his eyes were burning coals. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He marched to the throne and sat down, the metal of his armor clanking against the stone. He surveyed the room. The silence was absolute. My lords and ladies, the king's voice boomed deep and gravelly, I have summoned you early because I have found a rot in my kingdom. The crowd murmured nervously. Adrien squeezed Isabella's hand. This is it, he thought. He's going to purge the old advisors. He's going to make room for new blood. For me. I have spent the last 3 years fighting in the southern borderlands. The king continued. I left the governance of the capital to my council, but I hear whispers. Whispers of greed, of corruption, of men who treat their titles as licenses to steal and their oaths as suggestions. His eyes scanned the crowd and seemed to lock directly onto Adrien. Lord Adrien of Kensington, the king roared. Adrien's heart stopped, then hammered against his ribs. He shot a look at Isabella. He knows my name. Step forward, the king commanded. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Adrien, legs trembling, walked into the center of the open floor. Isabella strutted beside him, beaming, mistaking the summons for an honor. Your Majesty, Adrien said, bowing low, I am humbled. Stand up, the king barked. I see you have brought a guest. Is this your wife? The woman my old friend your father spoke so highly of? Adrien hesitated. Lying to a count was one thing. Lying to the conqueror was another. But he was in too deep. If he admitted this was his mistress, he would be ruined. Yes, your Majesty. Adrien lied, his voice shaking slightly. This is the Lady of Kensington. Isabella curtsied, a flamboyant, theatrical dip. It is an honor, your Majesty. I have so many ideas for the palace decor. This black stone is a bit dreary, don't you think? A collective gasp went through the hall. You did not critique the king's palace. The king stared at her. He didn't blink. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. You are the Lady of Kensington, the king asked softly. I am, Isabella said confidently, and the woman who was reported to be living in your manor, the one seen scrubbing floors, the one wearing rags. Oh, the help! Isabella laughed nervously. We have many servants, your majesty. Perhaps you are confused. I am rarely confused, the king said. He leaned forward. I was told that the Earl of Kensington married a woman named Adele, a woman of no standing, a peasant. A mistake of my youth, sire, Adrien said, quickly sensing the danger but misreading the direction. A charity case. She died, last winter, of the plague. The lie hung in the air. Died, the king repeated. How tragic. And you did not inform the royal census. I was too grief-stricken, Adrien stammered. The king sat back. A strange, terrifying smile curled his lip. Grief is a heavy burden, the king said. But it is strange, because the royal guards at the gate just informed me that the Lady of Kensington has arrived. Adrien's blood turned to ice. Impossible. She is at home. Who has arrived? Isabella snapped, looking at the door. The king raised a hand. Herald, open the doors of victory. But sire, the herald stammered, those doors are only for the royal family. Open them. The king's roar shook the chandeliers. The massive doors groaned open. The hall turned. Every eye was fixed on the grand entrance. At first there was only darkness. Then the rhythmic sound of steel boots on stone. Clack, clack, clack. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was not the Adele that Adrien knew. The woman who walked through the doors was a vision of war and grace. She wore the white dress, the same one Isabella had stained, but now under the lights of the great hall the fabric shimmered with an iridescent weave that caught the light like diamond dust. It wasn't linen. It was ether silk, a fabric worth more than Adrien's entire estate. Over the dress she wore the purple royal mantle trailing 10 feet behind her. On her waist sat the sword of Valyrian steel, and on her head, resting on her dark hair, was a circlet of white gold set with violet amethysts, the crown of the Princess of Valois. She didn't walk with her head down. She walked with the predatory grace of a panther. Adrien's mouth fell open. He felt the room spinning. It's her. But it can't be her. That's Adele. My Adele. The woman who sews in the corner. Isabella gripped his arm, her nails digging in. Who is that? She shrieked. Why is she wearing a crown? That's my dress. She stole that dress. Adele stopped in the center of the room 10 paces from Adrien and Isabella. She didn't look at them. She looked past them directly at the king. You're late, the king grumbled, though his eyes shone with a fierce pride. Traffic was terrible. Adele replied, her voice calm and carrying to every corner of the silent hall. I had to take out the trash before I left. She slowly turned her head to look at Adrien. The movement was slow, deliberate. Adrien looked into those violet eyes, and for the first time he saw the resemblance. The same jawline as the king, the same fierce fire. Adele, he whispered, his voice cracking. Adele is the name of a peasant girl, she said, cold as absolute zero. It is the name I used when I wanted to see if a man could love a woman for her soul, not her title. She stepped closer. The guests gasped as they saw the wine stain on her chest. It was still there, a faint red shadow. You, Isabella pointed a shaking finger. You are the maid. You are the nobody. Adele looked at Isabella. She didn't sneer. She didn't shout. She simply smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Adrien had ever seen. And you? Adele said softly. You are the woman who laughed at the royal weave. You called the armor of the moon monks cheap. You spilled wine on the banner of my house." Adele turned to the crowd, raising her voice. "My husband the Earl told you this dress cost 5 coppers. He apologized for my lack of taste." She grabbed the hem of her white dress and ripped a small strip off with a sharp tug. She threw it onto a nearby torch. Instead of burning, the fabric flared with a brilliant blue light and then extinguished itself unharmed. "Fireproof, blade-proof, woven for the daughters of the line of Theodore," Adele declared. She turned back to Adrien, who was now trembling so violently he could barely stand. "Father," Adele said, turning to the king, "I present to you Adrien, Earl of Kensington. The man who married your daughter treated her as a servant, paraded his mistress in front of her, and just now declared me dead." The king stood up. He drew his massive broadsword. The sound of metal on metal rang out like a death knell. "Dead," the king roared, descending the steps of the dais. "You told me she died of the plague." Adrien fell to his knees. "Your Majesty, please. I didn't know. She deceived me. It was a trick." "A trick?" The king stopped directly in front of Adrien. He towered over the kneeling earl. "The only trick, little man, is that you convinced yourself you were a lion when you are nothing but a rat." The king looked at Adele. "Daughter, what is your judgment?" Adele looked down at the man she had once hoped to love. She looked at Isabella, who was sobbing, her makeup running down her face, her gold dress looking tacky and cheap next to Adele's radiant power. "He wanted a title, father," Adele said calmly. "He wanted to be close to the crown. He wanted to be memorable." She drew her own sword. The sound was a hiss of steel. "I say we give him exactly what he wanted." The great hall of the palace was silent enough to hear a pin drop, or in this case, the shattering of a man's ego. Adrien was on his knees, his expensive velvet trousers soaking up the cold condensation of the stone floor. "A title?" Adrien stammered, his eyes darting between the king's massive broadsword and Adele's cold, impassive face. I only wanted to secure the future of our family, Adele. I did it for us. I thought, if I appeared single, I could gain favor and then bring you into the fold later." "Liar!" Isabella shrieked. She scrambled away from him, her heels scraping awkwardly on the floor. She looked up at the king, clasping her jeweled hands together. "Your Majesty, I am a victim here. This man, this deceiver, he told me he was a widower. He told me his wife died of a wasting sickness years ago. I had no idea I was trespassing on the marriage of a princess." Adele laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. She sheathed her sword with a sharp click and walked slowly toward Isabella. "Is that so, Isabella?" Adele asked, circling the woman in the gold dress. "You didn't know. Yet last night at dinner you asked me if I traded a chicken for my dress. You knew I was his wife then. You poured wine on me to mark your territory." Isabella turned pale. That was a misunderstanding." "There's another misunderstanding we should clear up," a voice called out from the crowd. It was Lord Blackwood, the High Treasurer, the very man Adrien had been desperate to impress. He stepped forward holding a thick ledger. He adjusted his spectacles and looked down at Isabella with a look of bored recognition. "Lord Kensington introduced you as Lady Isabella of the Southern Isles." "A wealthy heiress," Lord Blackwood said, opening his ledger. "However, I have a very good memory for faces, especially those who appear on the wanted posters in the lower districts." Adrien looked up confused. What are you talking about? She is a noble woman. Her father owns the sapphire mines." "Her father," Lord Blackwood continued dryly, "was a butcher in the East End named Pete, and this woman is not Lady Isabella. Her name is Bessie Miller. She is a known confidence trickster who targets rising nobles, drains their accounts, and vanishes before the wedding." The crowd gasped. The twist hit Adrien like a physical blow. He stared at Isabella, at Bessie. "You," Adrien whispered. The necklace. The ruby necklace I bought you. You said it was lost in transit. I pawned it. Isabella spat, dropping the accent and her facade entirely. Her face twisted into a sneer. And you were an easy mark, Adrien. You were so desperate to look important, so desperate to have a trophy on your arm you didn't check the credentials. You looked at a diamond and didn't realize it was glass. Just like you looked at a princess and thought she was a peasant. The irony washed over the room. Adrien had despised Adele for her simplicity, not knowing she was royalty. He had worshipped Isabella for her glamour, not knowing she was a common criminal. I spent everything on you, Adrien murmured, the horror setting in. I mortgaged the estate. I emptied the accounts. I am destitute. You deserve each other, Adele said, looking down at them. A man who loves only status, and a woman who loves only gold. But there is a problem. You committed fraud against the crown. King Theodore stepped forward. Bessie Miller, you will be escorted to the dungeons. You have many debts to repay to the merchants of this city. You will work in the royal laundries until every copper is paid back. No, Isabella screamed as two guards seized her arms. He promised me a dukedom. It's his fault. He's the one who lied to the king. As she was dragged away, kicking and screaming, her gold dress tore on the rough stone floor, revealing the dirty, unwashed petticoats beneath. Now only Adrien remained. And you, the king growled, resting the tip of his sword under Adrien's chin, forcing him to look up. You dishonored my daughter. You declared her dead while she sat in your house mending your clothes. The penalty for treason against the royal blood is death. Father, Adele said softly. The king paused. You wish to spare him. Death is too easy, Adele said. He wants to be a lord. He wants to be remembered. Let us give him a life that he will never forget. The silence that followed Isabella's screaming exit was heavier than the stone walls of the palace. The great hall, usually filled with the murmur of gossip and the clinking of crystal, was now a tomb. 2,000 of the realm's most powerful nobles held their breath, their eyes fixed on the solitary figure kneeling in the center of the room. Adrien, the Earl of Kensington, was alone. The golden chandeliers above seemed to burn hotter, acting as a spotlight on his humiliation. He could feel the eyes of his peers, men he had drank with, women he had charmed, rivals he had sneered at, boring into his back. But he dared not turn around. He dared not look anywhere but at the polished black boots of King Theodore, which stood inches from his trembling knees. Stand up, the king said. The voice was not a shout. It was a low rumble, like the shifting of tectonic plates before an earthquake. It was a command that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the bones. Adrien tried to stand, but his legs were like water. He stumbled, catching himself on his hands, a posture of total submission. He scrambled upright, swaying, his face drained of all blood. Your Majesty. Adrien croaked, his throat dry as sandpaper. Please. There has been a mistake, a terrible lapse in judgment. I was bewitched. That woman, the impostor, she clouded my mind. Bewitched. The king repeated the word, tasting it like spoiled meat. He took a slow step forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the earl. You say you were tricked by a fake heiress. Perhaps. Greed makes men blind. But was it witchcraft that made you look at my daughter, your lawful wife, and call her a peasant? Was it magic that made you laugh while she was humiliated in your own home? I didn't know. Adrien pleaded, tears of genuine terror now streaming down his face. He turned his desperate gaze to Adele. She stood like a statue carved from ice and starlight, the ether silk dress shimmering with an ethereal glow that seemed to burn his retinas. Adele, look at me. It's Adrien. I am your husband. I took you in when you had nothing. I gave you a home. Adele took one step forward. The sound of her heel striking the marble echoed like a gunshot. You gave me a roof, Adrien, she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. But you never gave me a home. A home is built on respect. You treated me like a stray dog you regretted feeding. You hid me away. You erased me. I was trying to protect you. Adrien lied, the desperation making him irrational. The court? It's a dangerous place. I didn't want them to eat you alive. I did it for us. I wanted to secure the treasury position so I could give you the life of a duchess. Imagine it, Adele. You and I ruling the capital. He reached out a hand toward her, his fingers trembling. Don't, King Theodore growled. The king raised his hand, and the captain of the Iron Guard, Sir Marcus, stepped forward. He held a velvet cushion, but on it lay no award. It held a pair of heavy iron shears. The title of Earl, the king announced, his voice booming to the rafters, is a sacred trust. It is granted to those who protect the weak, uphold the truth, and serve the crown with honor. You, Adrien of Kensington, have failed in every regard. The king picked up the shears. He grabbed the silk sash draped across Adrien's chest, the sash bearing the Kensington crest. Rippee! The sound of tearing silk was violent and final. The king sliced the sash in two and let the pieces flutter to the floor. I hereby strip you of your rank, the king declared. Next, the king reached for Adrien's hand. He didn't ask for the signet ring. He pulled it off Adrien's finger with force that nearly dislocated the knuckle. He threw the heavy gold ring onto the stone floor, where it spun noisily before settling in the dust. I hereby strip you of your name, the king continued. The House of Kensington is dissolved. Your lands are forfeit. Your manor is seized. Your accounts are frozen to repay the debts you accrued to buy favors you did not earn. Adrien gasped, clutching his chest as if he were having a heart attack. My money. My house. I have nothing. You have your life, Adele said softly, which is more than you deserve. She signaled to Marcus. The old commander, his scarred face grim, stepped forward carrying a rough, shapeless bundle. He threw it at Adrien's feet. It landed with a heavy, dull thud. Adrien looked down. It was a tunic made of coarse brown burlap, the kind worn by the lowest field hands, and a pair of stiff, mud-caked boots. What is this? Adrien whispered. Put it on, Adele commanded. Here. Adrien looked around wildly. In front of everyone. You had no trouble watching me sit in a room full of your guests wearing a wine-stained dress while you laughed. Adele reminded him, her eyes flashing violet fire. You have no trouble with humiliation, Adrien, as long as it is not happening to you. Put it on. Shaking violently, Adrien began to unbutton his velvet doublet. He stripped off the fine silk shirt, the tailored trousers, the boots made of Italian leather. He stood shivering in his underclothes, a small, pathetic man stripped of his peacock feathers. He pulled the scratchy burlap tunic over his head. It was rough against his skin, smelling of earth and sweat. He shoved his feet into the heavy boots. He looked up, a broken man. Now what? He whimpered. Do I go to the dungeons? The dungeons are for criminals, Adele said, shaking her head. You are not a criminal, Adrien. You are something worse. You are a man who does not know the value of labor. You called my dress cheap because it was simple. You mocked the work of the weavers because you have never created anything in your life. She walked closer to him, stopping only when she was close enough for him to smell the faint scent of winter roses that clung to her hair. You are going to the northern provinces, she sentenced. To the ice fields of Valoria. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Even the king looked impressed by the severity of the judgment. The ice fields were a frozen hellscape where the wind cut like knives. You will not be a prisoner. Adele continued, her voice ringing clear. You will be a laborer. Specifically, you will work in the royal flax fields. The very flax used to weave this dress. She ran a hand down the shimmering ether silk of her gown. The flax of the north is tough. It must be pulled by hand from the frozen earth. It cuts the fingers. It breaks the nails. It requires patience, strength, and humility to harvest. You will harvest it. You will spin it. You will weave it. Adele, please! Adrien sobbed, falling to his knees again, clutching the rough burlap of his new tunic. I am an earl. I have never done manual labor. I will die out there. Then you will die a man who finally understands the cost of a thread, Adele said without pity. Your sentence is 10 years. You have a quota to fill every month. If you fail, you do not eat. If you weave a cloth that is flawed, you start again. You will learn that simple does not mean cheap. You will learn that the silence of a worker is not stupidity, but focus. She turned to the crowd, addressing the stunned nobles. Let this be a lesson to the House of Peers, she announced. Rank is not an excuse for cruelty. The crown watches. The crown remembers. She turned back to Adrien. He was sobbing into his hands, a huddled mass of brown burlap on the pristine marble floor. Guards, the king barked. Remove this laborer from my sight. He is dirtying the floor. 2 members of the Iron Guard seized Adrien by the arms. They didn't treat him gently. They dragged him backward, his heavy boots scraping loudly across the stone. Adele! Adrien screamed one last time, reaching out a desperate hand toward her. I loved you. In my own way, I loved you. Adele watched him being dragged toward the great doors of victory. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. No, Adrien, she whispered to the empty air where he had once stood. You loved the reflection of yourself you saw in my eyes. But the mirror is broken now. As the door slammed shut with a final booming thud sealing Adrien's fate, the king placed a heavy hand on Adele's shoulder. You have a heart of iron, my daughter, he said quietly. Iron is forged in fire, father, Adele replied, looking down at the amethyst ring on her finger. And he provided plenty of fuel. She turned back to the silent room, the ether silk dress swirling around her like liquid moonlight. The court bowed low, lower than they had ever bowed before. Not out of politeness, but out of fear and awe. The peasant wife was gone. The lioness of Valois had returned, and the hunt was over. The winter snows had melted, and the royal gardens were in full bloom. Adele sat on a stone bench overlooking the capital. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She wore a gown of deep violet, embroidered with silver thread, but her hair was loose, blowing in the wind. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was the king's chief advisor. Under her influence, the court had changed. The extravagant parties had ceased, replaced by councils that focused on the welfare of the common people. The nobility grumbled, but they feared the White Wolf, as they now called her. King Theodore walked up behind her, his heavy armor replaced by a lighter tunic. He looked older, but happier. A letter arrived from the north, the king said, handing her a rough piece of parchment. Adele took it. The handwriting was shaky, the letters ill-formed as if written by hands that were stiff and calloused. To Her Highness. The frost came early this year. The flax is hard to pull. My fingers are cracked. I sleep in a dormitory with 50 other men. We eat porridge. Yesterday I saw a woman wearing a white scarf. Just a simple scarf. I found myself staring at it, admiring the weave. I realized it must have taken her weeks to make. I am tired, Adele. I am so tired. And I am sorry. A. Adele read the letter twice. She didn't smile, but her expression softened. He is learning, she said. He is suffering, the king corrected with a grunt. As he should. Suffering is the only way to burn away the arrogance, Adele said. She folded the letter and placed it in her pocket. Maybe in 9 more years he will be a man worth knowing. But he will never again be a man I love. And what of you, my daughter? The king sat beside her. The Duke of Westhaven has asked for your hand. He is a good man, wealthy but kind. Adele looked out over the city. She touched the silver locket around her neck, the one she had worn on that terrible night. I have learned my lesson, father, she said. I tried to find love by hiding who I was. I thought if I made myself small, I would find someone who loved me for me. But I realized that the right man won't need me to be small. He will want me to stand tall." She stood up the sunlight, catching the amethyst ring on her finger. "I will not marry for a long time," she said firmly. "I have a kingdom to help you run, and I have a new project." "Oh!" The king raised an eyebrow. "I am opening a school." Adele smiled a genuine, radiant smile. "A school for the daughters of the poor. I will teach them reading, writing, and statecraft, and I will teach them one very important lesson." "And what is that?" "That a queen is not defined by her crown," Adele said, looking toward the horizon. "And a woman is never defined by her dress." The wind caught her cloak, billowing it out behind her like wings. She turned back to the palace, ready to rule. She was no longer the exiled wife. She was Adele of Valois, the lioness, and she would never lower her head again. And that is the story of how a greedy earl and a deceptive mistress learned the hardest lesson of all: never judge a book by its cover, and never ever insult the daughter of a conqueror. Adrien wanted a trophy, but he threw away a treasure. He spent the rest of his days working the fields, haunted by the memory of the white dress he once mocked. It's a powerful reminder that true nobility isn't about gold or titles. It's about integrity, loyalty, and how you treat those you think are beneath you. I hope you enjoyed this story of royal justice and karma. If you felt a chill when Adele walked into the ballroom in her true form, hit that like button right now. What do you think? Was Adrien's punishment of 10 years in the fields too harsh, or did he get off easy? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about hidden identities, dramatic betrayals, and satisfying revenge, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.